Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Kim Rael, co-founder and CEO of Azuca. Thank you very much for joining me today, Kim.
Great to be here.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabis-equipment-news.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter to make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Kim, I always like to start simple. I hear that you're a startup maven. What was it that brought you to cannabis?
I would never use that word, but it's funny. I have been doing startups for a very long time, and I love startups. But most of my experience was in tech and finance. So I was a co-founder of an advanced energy startup. I was a venture capitalist investing in tech startups for a very long time. And there came a point in my career where I was pivoting out of tech and finance and loved startups, wanted to stay involved in the startup world, but wanted to get out of tech and into something in the wellness sector. So it was really my passion for wellness, broadly defined, that I was kind of looking around, listening to the world, turning over some rocks, and cannabis came and kind of grabbed me from behind and said, you really need to come do this. And it was kind of a funny story because I was introduced to Ron Silver, who's the original inventor and founder. He's the chef who is behind the formulations that have become now Azuca Time Infusion, which is this really cool thing that I'll talk more about, I'm sure. But Ron had invented this cool cannabis formulation, and he's a creative, he's an artist, he's a chef, was looking for a partner to be CEO and launch this thing as a business. And so I was introduced to Ron, and the rest is just kind of history.
What was it about that, the interaction with Ron where you realized it was going to be a good fit?
It was the product. It was, I was not a cannabis consumer at the time, like a few times in, college, whatever, but it wasn't my thing. I didn't understand it. I was in that category of bought that Nancy Reagan, just say no propaganda, hook, line, and sinker. I was that mom. And I was kind of talked into being in a focus group and sampling Ron's product, which at that time it was a cannabis-infused sugar. And I was actually afraid to even try it. So I represent that consumer that we serve really well with our formulations, which is, make cannabis friendly and approachable and understandable, right? So a friend of mine said, now you should be in this focus group. You should try this. So I agreed to try it. I put some of Ron's infused sugar in a cup of coffee one Sunday morning and went for a walk. And I was immediately converted. The effect was incredible. It was very nice. My drug of choice at that time was red wine. And I actually don't consume alcohol at all anymore. And to me, it was, a little bit similar to wine, kind of take the edge off, but in a much more uplifting way, right? Alcohol is a depressant. It didn't have any of that effect, but kind of just lifted up my day. And I immediately knew that this product, this formulation, this plant was going to be helpful to people, right? So it was the product first, and getting my head wrapped around the cannabis plant and the miraculous plant that it is, as opposed to what I grew up with, which was the demonization of cannabis. So I often tell people I went from, the anti-cannabis, actually afraid of it, literally afraid of it, to skeptical, but maybe to, curious, to like, oh my word, like I've been an idiot. I've been, a victim of this propaganda war all my life. I'm in my late 50s. So, I got involved in the industry in my early 50s to all the way in, to a real enthusiast for not only cannabis, but plant medicine broadly defined. And I just absolutely love it. So I agreed with Ron to, actually, it's a kind of a funny story because originally I'm like, I will agree to pretend to be CEO for 90 days.
Okay. Pretend to be CEO?
I will pretend to be CEO. And there was a reason for that. Like, I'd been in some business partnerships that didn't work out so well, right? You get into these business relationships and, I wanted to see who Ron really was as a person. So I said, after 90 days, if things aren't working, we call it off. No harm, no foul. You don't owe me a dime. You don't owe me any equity. You go on with your invention, find a better CEO. Because I really wanted to take some time to get to know Ron, get to know his character, his integrity. And in 90 days, I was absolutely in love with all of the ideas of what we could do as a partnership and with this invention, and be helpful to people and be creative, and really be part of the creation of a new, a movement, an industry. So that's sort of the origin story of me and Ron Silver. Sometimes I call it the odd couple of cannabis, because we are so, the odd couple of cannabis, right? You remember, I'm old enough to remember the old sitcom, because we're yin and yang. We're very different. And it's one of those partnerships that, because we're so different, it works really, really well.
Okay. So who's the Felix?
Who's the what?
Felix? Yeah.
Oscar and Felix.
Yeah.
Ron is the crazy creative. I am the, I'm the MBA, and I'm the structure. I have a little artistic gene myself, but in this role, it's like, I gotta be, and Ron is the creative. I mean, he's this wonderful, lover of cannabis and passionate about using these very friendly, approachable, understandable, ingestible products to help people.
Did it take 90 days for you to solidify your role as CEO?
In the first 90 days, I was trying to figure out, first of all, I was doing my due diligence on cannabis, the plant. What can we do with this? And then how do you create a business? What's a business model that will work? Because we're going to have to go raise investor capital, right? We didn't raise a lot of money, but we raised a little bit of money to get launched. And so I spent that time trying to build a business case in my own mind, and then something that we could articulate to investors. And, we had the classic dilemma in cannabis, which is, how do you scale when we're still in this ecosystem where you can't move product across state or country lines? That just makes no sense, right? I've been involved in dozens and dozens of startups. They've never had a weird constraint like that. And then you add 280E on there, and that's just absolute insanity, right? Mm-hmm. So the business obstacles are unlike any I've ever seen, right, in my career. So I spent that first 90 days really trying to figure out and start to be able to describe a business model. So we've got this invention. How do you create a business model around that invention that is sustainable? And that's one of the problems we see in cannabis today, right? We see a lot of fallout in the industry of businesses, some that raised a tremendous amount of capital that are, that haven't been able to sometimes, because of these ecosystem constraints, to build a sustainable business.
So after you did your due diligence, what did you come up with? What is your idea of a successful business model with this product in cannabis?
Sure. So what we came up with, and we have certainly iterated on this a number of times since our first launch in 2018, is a business model that it's really about focusing on what we can be best in the world at. as a company. And what we can be best in the world at is designing these, what I call advanced formulations. So we're in this subsector of cannabis. Some people call it emulsion technology. Some people call it, nano. I don't use that term at all. I don't think it means anything. But I call this segment advanced formulations. And what we can be best in the world at is taking the active molecules from the miraculous cannabis plant and transforming those molecules into ingredients that are both easy for the human body to intake and metabolize. So you get fast acting, predictable edibles as a consumer, and also very easy and scalable for brands and manufacturers to make in a cost-effective way. So that's what we can be best in the world at. And we defined a business model where we license our intellectual property. So we really look a little bit like a biotech company. We license our intellectual property to brands and manufacturers all over the country, in a couple of countries beyond the US now, and growing there. We license the IP and the formulations. And then as part of that license agreement, we sell a non-infused precursor ingredient, which is called Activator. So we now have a family of activators, depending on your product form. And we sell that Activator to our customers. And that's it. There's no royalties. There's no, big licensing fees. There's none of that. All we do is sell a product in a package on a pay-as-you-go basis to customers who want to make the best ingestible cannabis on the planet. So we help them make their brands better.
Before you came to cannabis, you said you were in the tech world. What was your greatest hit or your favorite startup that you were a part of?
Oh, wow. Interesting. I would say it was my venture capital firm, which was a startup that funded other startups, but we were a startup VC team. So we got a team together. We raised 3 different investment funds, and we invested in dozens of other tech companies. So that was super fun, because we got to be involved in dozens of companies, work with dozens of entrepreneurs. Every day was different, and that's what I love about startups. I think that's why I love cannabis so much, right? Because there are no 2 days that are the same. There's always some new twist and turn, and you just have to constantly be scanning the ecosystem, talking to customers and partners. So I love a little bit of chaos. I think chaos is opportunity. So,
well, I think you're going to get plenty of chaos in cannabis. And as you mentioned that, what was it? The insanity of the business. What has the adjustment been like for you? Just because we hear a lot about people coming from outside the industry, especially in the C-suites, and kind of coming into it. And sometimes they struggle. Sometimes they're able to kind of like rein it in and really give focus and direction. Were you almost chased off or like scared off by the insanity of the business?
I'd have to say no. I'd have to say it was like once I got the hook, and once I re-educated myself on the history, like why was this plant? Why did I have this negative? Why did I believe the stigma? Once I did my research on the history and understood all of the falsehoods that had created that stigma in my brain, I was all in, right? And all in on trying to be a voice to other people who had also taken all of that propaganda at face value. I'll tell you a funny story. I mean, it was crazy. My then teenage daughter, about 2 years before I joined the industry, she was in high school. She knows I tell the story all the time. She got caught on a school trip. The kids had a joint. They were passing it around, whatever. They all got in trouble, full investigation, called the parents, the whole 9 yards. And I was so furious at her that, she got her school consequences. And when she got home, she got punished by her mother. And her punishment was to write a 5,000-word essay on the evils of cannabis. for me. Yeah. 2 years later, same mother is CEO of a cannabis company, and said daughter is then, a young adult, and she's like, who are you and what did you do with my mother? But I mean, that's how ingrained I was in that wrong thinking. Right? I was ingrained in wrong thinking. And so and I think one of the ways I can be an asset in the industry is because I came into it with that perspective, right? And I actually do this fairly often, right? I can bring people on that journey who are still there, and I can talk them through, like, how did this fairly straight-laced, MBA end up doing this crazy cannabis thing? Well, that's a story I can tell, and I'm very enthusiastic to share, to bring other people through kind of to the other side of that, that darkness that so many of us grew up with around the plant.
So how'd you grade the essay?
I think I checked the box and said, don't ever do that again.
Right. Did she, over the course of the essay, just like, you know what, I tried reading or writing about the evils of this plant, but the more I've looked into it, it turns out it's actually quite good. That's
exactly what happened, actually.
Really?
She's like, yeah, that's exactly what happened. She's like, Mom, all this stuff is just like, it's BS. It's not, So we had that conversation even at that time about, this is, I don't think she used the word propaganda, but that's the word I use now, because I just, I still see the Nancy Reagan ad, right? From when I was 9 years old.
Yeah. No, for me, it's still fighting against that Dare t-shirt, that initial reaction that is just ingrained in you until, for lack of a better term, you see the light. So I want to talk about the technology too, because the technology has the potential to be a huge disruptor in edibles, beverages, and other infused products. Talk a little bit more about, so it's the Activator product and how, because you're essentially a high-end ingredient manufacturer, right?
Yes, exactly. So Activator, for everything except chocolate, is a liquid. It comes in a, we ship it out to our customers in a lovely, bottle. And again, this is non-infused. It's a precursor. And if you were a gummy manufacturer, we would ship this to you. You would take your distillate or your other concentrate. You can use live resin, live rosin, RSO. We've tested pretty much every extract and concentrate that you would want to use. You take that activator and you combine it according to our SOPs with your active input, which is how we scale across state lines, right? We don't manufacture THC products. We manufacture the non-infused precursor. And then what you end up with is, you think of this tennis ball as a THC molecule. It's an oil molecule. It's hard to work with as a manufacturer because THC distillates like tree sap, right? It sticks to everything. It's hard to measure. So what our process does is it takes that oil molecule and it encapsulates it like in a hydrophilic coating, kind of like this insulated little tea glass. And that hydrophilic coating of that single molecule is what makes our products so easy for the human body to absorb. So this encapsulated molecule, because it's hydrophilic or water-friendly, water-seeking, and our bodies are over 60% water. So when you ingest it, it's absorbed in the soft tissues. It reaches your endocannabinoid receptors very quickly without breaking down into 11-hydroxy THC, right? This is still delta-9 THC, which is what gives you the smoker's high, the euphoric effect. So this hits your bloodstream in 5 to 15 minutes and you experience the effects very quickly. And it's more of a euphoric smoker's high in an edible product. So it solves all of those problems for consumers. So it's fast acting. It tastes great. We don't use any surfactants or weird stuff in our ingredients. and it's a predictable experience, right?
Mhm.
So it solves those problems for consumers. And then if you're a manufacturer, it solves a couple of problems too. One is this process takes care of the stickiness, right? So you don't have distillate sticking to everything in your kitchen.
Okay.
So your active ingredient loss in your cooking process is actually improved, meaning if you traditionally are losing 20% of your distillate by the time you calculate the end of it, just because it's sticking to spatulas and dishes and stuff. This process can save up to, in one study, 65% of the manufacturing waste of active distillate. So,
Wow.
so yeah, it's kind of that really nice combination of benefits for the consumer who is consuming the cannabis and the manufacturer who's making the products by using this time infusion process.
How does it differ from a nanoemulsion?
So to me, the word nanoemulsion means so many things, it doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
People use that term, I think, very loosely in the industry, and we don't use it at all. So the term we use is molecular encapsulation. So individual molecular encapsulation.
Okay. Is it that that's what other people are trying to do and just misusing the term, in your opinion?
I think it's a little hard to tell because other players in this segment, it's a very opaque segment, right? There's we're all intellectual property players. We're all very, we guard our intellectual property. So it's hard for me to have an opinion about what, another player is actually doing. So I can speak about what we're doing. I will tell you, we don't use any weird equipment. We use a mixer that is about the size of a laptop in your kitchen. So no weird equipment. We can train a kitchen crew in a couple of hours to do the emulsion. You literally, put the activator and the active in our mixer and you push one button and you walk away and it's done in an hour. And then you put that in your process. So we've taken years and years of experimentation and development and made it that simple for our manufacturing partners at the brand level.
Well, and I think it also probably makes the ROI pretty simple to calculate as well. I mean, just on the savings when it comes to waste reduction.
Correct.
Do you know what is the ROI?
I guess it depends on what someone's existing manufacturing process is, because everybody's a little different. And I think, my experience, different manufacturers have a somewhat wide range of kind of specificity in how they're doing it in how they're actually measuring things like transfer loss today. So I would say there's no one magic number in terms of ROI. I've done some calculations. We have a new formulation called whole plant activator, right? Which is an activator that you use instead of using distillate or live rosin, you actually use flour.
Mm-hmm.
Use flour in our activator and you get an infused ingredient that is a fast-acting, great-tasting cannabinoid that can go straight into an edible. Now, with that one, there's about a 400% ROI compared to, using traditional concentrates, because you don't have to go through the extraction process.
Right. So how does it work? You just put the whole flour in the mixer with the activator and the end ingredient is used for edibles?
Yep. It's great. Wow. And we just launched this a couple months ago. It's called Whole Plant Activator. And what's amazing about this is you take flour and you measure your cannabinoid and terpene profile of your flour. You put it into our process, our activator, and then you measure the output there, and you have retained the cannabinoid profile of the flour into the fast-acting ingredient. And then that goes into your gummy. And it's very the technical capability to do things like measure terpene profile in a gummy final form, that is still a pretty immature capability in the industry. But we are now testing for that full terpene profile of the flower in the gummies. So what you end up with is an edible form of cannabis that finally delivers the benefit of the whole flower, the full inflorescence of the flower in this fast-acting edible form.
Yeah, it's sort of whole spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
But by launching that whole activator, are you rendering your other products obsolete?
Well, I don't think so, but I would happily move them into obsolescence if everybody wanted to move in the direction. I think there still will be demand for making edibles out of concentrates, distillates and live rosins. But it's really a whole nother level of thinking about cannabis edibles, right? And when we give samples of these strain specific, we've been making them into strain specific gummies just in-house for testing. It is striking the way the plant becomes this really delicious edible. So for example, one of the first ones I tried using just cannabis flower in our process in an unflavored gummy recipe, so no other flavoring added. I could have sworn there was pineapple flavor added. You could actually, the actual flavors of the cannabis plant are present in a very pleasant way. Sometimes I say these gummies, these whole plant gummies, taste the way a really good grow smells, right? When you just get that, to take that and translate it into an edible that is delicious. It sounds so weird. It really does, but it is true. It is, it's really powerful.
You have a different solution for chocolate. How is it different from the other activators?
So all of the activators have water as an ingredient, and you can't put water into tempering chocolate. So if you're making a chocolate product that is a tempered chocolate, you would use our chocolate activator because there's no water in it. It goes directly into your tempering process. So very easy to use, but just because you can't touch water. If you're making a chocolate product that has like a ganache in it, where there's liquid that goes into the filling, you can use one of the other activators. But if it's just like you're making a chocolate bar, you would want to use the chocolate activator to make your chocolate fast acting.
Why is it important to have chef-ready ingredients that can take effect within 5 to 15 minutes?
Well, I think the main reason for consumers, right, is to have a predictable, enjoyable experience every time. Fast acting, predictable onset and offset, great taste, right? And the main thing for manufacturers is to have a repeatable, reliable, cost-effective, scalable manufacturing solution. That if I'm a brand in Colorado and I want to scale to New York and New Jersey, I can scale my brand in any state using the solution. And that's a big differentiator between us and some of our competitors in this space, where they have to do the emulsion. They have to handle your active. So, they'll come on site with specialized equipment, they'll run a big batch for you, and then they disappear. That's not our business model. We empower our customers, our partners, to do the infusion themselves at whatever demand they have, and we don't have to touch it. So they have full control over their process, soup to nuts.
Do you have an understanding of what share of the market you guys currently have?
That's a great question. If there's anybody from BDSA or New Frontier Data listening, I'm on a soapbox to get this category tracked. Right now, there is no, there's nobody that I found anyway that's tracking this advanced formulation segment, or even that's tracking product SKUs for fast acting, which is just one attribute, right? But yeah, we don't have that data. I'd love to have that data. I'd pay for that data if BDSA is.
We will make sure to cut this specific spot out, and we will tag them on all the social media for you.
That's great. Excellent. But yeah, so one of the things that I would add to that is, we did our first launch in 2018. And at that time, most edibles were what I call traditional edibles, right? They were the slow onset. They were get converted into 11-hydroxy in your liver. And, part of my frame of the industry was that over time, traditional edibles were dead, right? That consumers wouldn't put up with slow onset because they didn't have to. And at that time, when we first launched, there were very few SKUs that had a fast acting claim, even on the labels. I tried the ones I could get my hands on, and many of them were actually not fast acting, or they just tasted awful. And what I see now in the field, and again, this would be a great project for BDSA or New Frontier, is, if I go out in the field, I'd say a third of the SKUs now have some kind of fast onset claim, right? So where my head is at is, that trend's going to continue. Just like I like to use the analogy of dial-up internet, right? We were all around, well, not all, but you and I were probably around when it was dial-up internet, right?
Yeah.
We would never use dial-up internet today. We use broadband. And why would we put up with something slow and unpredictable and painful when we don't have to? And I think that the edibles category is in the process of that conversion. I think we're about 30% of the way there, where manufacturers are like, oh yeah, I need to do something about onset. So what we've done is we've raised the stakes, right? So from where I sit, fast acting to me right now is table stakes. If your edible is not fast acting, you're not winning. You're not going to win in this category. And we're focused now on, in addition to fast acting and great tasting, right? Those two are table stakes. What are the effects? And our edibles give consumers that euphoric delta 9 effect that, that smoker's high in an edible form, as opposed to the, couch locky effect of traditional edibles. So I'm looking for better and better, consumer experience. And again, like fast acting, table stakes. Let's do even more. Let's deliver something even better to consumers.
Is there something on the label, or how would we know which products are being made with your technology as an ingredient?
Sure. So products with our ingredient actually have our Azuca or Azuca Time Infusion on their label, or on their ingredient panel. It'll say Azuca Time Infusion. So we have a co-branding model. What we deliver is a value add, a premium ingredient that consumers are starting to recognize. And so we put that front and center, or our partners put that front and center on their labels.
What markets are you the most prevalent in right now?
Oh, wow. We are in, I think, close to 20 states now. Canada, Puerto Rico. We're expanding into South America now, looking at Europe. I think we have the most SKUs in Massachusetts, but I'd actually have. Are you probably SKUs in Massachusetts right now?
Okay. Are you in Illinois?
We are in Illinois.
All right. Well, good, because I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm close to Illinois. That's the only reason I'm here, interested.
We are in Illinois. I'll send you where to look for us.
Excellent. That would be excellent. In your opinion, do you see Generation Z being the last generation with unpredictable edibles?
100%, right? Because of what I said before, like Gen Z will also never use dial-up internet.
True.
Lucky them.
Unless it becomes like weirdly hip somehow. I understand that.
Yeah, that's hard to imagine. I gave a talk once that I actually played that old sound from like, and to make the point about how painful that was.
Mm-hmm. Quite jarring. I mean, it's, so Gen Z will be able to tell their children, back in my day, we didn't know what we were really getting into when we bit into that chocolate bar. So true. You have mentioned the flavor profile quite a bit. Are there any issues with taste or flavoring products that use your technology?
No, one of the things that's interesting about this process, right, is this encapsulation process also naturally just masks the acrid taste of a distillate, right? So you end up with a very pleasant tasting product.
Okay.
And also, we don't use surfactants in the activator for these edibles. So there are other companies, again, in this advanced formulation segment, that have to use surfactants, and then you have to use bitter blockers to block the bitterness. So you end up with this ingredient panel that's got all kinds of stuff on it that you don't necessarily really want in your product. So no bitter blockers, no surfactants, but kind of the natural taking the edge off of the bitterness of the cannabis extract.
No, I think that's really important for people to understand because of all the technology that's gone in to take that bitterness out. I also like the idea of strain-specific gummies and how that could potentially change or like maybe veer off course from some of the, I guess, naturally flavored gummies that we see out there that maybe aren't as natural. Right.
No, and I think that this is going to be a whole new category in the edible industry is this trend and also this desire on the part of the more sophisticated cannabis consumers, right, to really get closer to the plant. So, the canna curious will, like your introductory fast acting gummy will be a great product, but someone who really understands the cannabis plant like you do, right, will appreciate the strain specific effects of this strain versus that strain. And it's not only the effects, they actually have different flavors. It's kind of like fine wine, right, where you really come to enjoy the cannabis plant in a whole new way. Whole new way.
Well, and maybe even bring some of those cannabis connoisseurs over to edibles where they've sort of remained in the flower category because of that, I guess, like idea or belief that that's the closest to the plant.
You're spot on there. And it also enables those consumers to enjoy the cannabis plant in, venues and settings where you can't smoke or it's impractical to smoke, right? So it just opens up a whole new range of experiences, I think, for those consumers.
In terms of opening up new experiences, in your opinion, what are the challenges when it comes to social consumption, and how does this new technology look to undo that?
I'm an optimist, and I really look forward to the day where, my adult children and grandchildren can walk into a venue and order a cannabis cocktail, and their friend next to them orders, their Chardonnay, right? And that there will be more choices at retail for social consumption of cannabis plant. We're not there yet. Our regulatory frame for social consumption is still in the dark ages, frankly. But what we can do is we can create tools to normalize that experience. So one of my favorite things is we have a cocktail kit, right? Where you can use. We make a fast-acting cannabis-infused simple syrup. Oh yeah, there we go. I do have looks kind of like that. And every mixologist on the planet knows what to do with a simple syrup, right? It's in every cocktail on the planet. We actually made a cool little set of some fun. We've got the Time Collins, which is our brand. We've got the Hurricana, the Bud Slide. So we've made all these fun, cannabis cocktail recipes using one ingredient. So either at home, you can have a party at home with cannabis cocktails. I'm headed to Minnesota in a couple of days to, get my feet on the ground there, because I think they're really doing some leading edge stuff around cannabis beverages and social consumption in Minnesota. So I want to get out there and really experience it firsthand in the next few days. So I see this as coming. And I think that, Gen Z, I think our children's generations are frankly going to be smarter than our generation was about things like alcohol, right?
Mhm.
About consuming ethanol on a regular basis for fun. It's really,
Yeah.
So I see a lot of changes. I may be a few years ahead of, where the regulatory frame and the market is, but I see it coming. And I'm very excited about that, the normalization of cannabis beverages for social consumption.
Well, I'm excited to hear about what you find in Minnesota as well, because I've heard the same thing. And Minnesota, with the way they wrote those rules, really opened the door to potential venues like stadiums and other places to have sort of like almost a temporary license to be able to sell cannabis cocktails. And no, I'm really interested to see what you find there.
Cool. We'll talk next week.
You had mentioned the Time Collins. So I want to make sure I have this right. So Time, that is the technology, right? The thermodynamic individual molecular encapsulation.
That's an acronym for the actual process.
Yeah, that's the tennis ball in the cup. It's Time.
You got it. Got it.
Do you have in your list of cocktails there? Do you have a personal favorite?
My personal favorite is the Nito Mojito.
Okay.
I love the mojito. It is just like so refreshing, and like think of mint and lime and seltzer and cannabis. Oh my gosh, beautiful. Great on a hot day.
So you had the RTD Activator launched in June. As you have launched these products and brought them to market, what has been the response?
We found people are very, very excited about this business model that empowers the manufacturers to control their destiny, right? So that I think is the thing that puts our solutions ahead of our competitors from a manufacturing perspective. And then, the consumer experience of like this euphoric Delta 9 tastes great, clean label. The combination of those two has been really well received.
Have you had any difficulties bringing it to market?
I think like every startup, you have to like listen and learn and pivot. It's funny. I mentioned our first launch was in Massachusetts in 2018, and I was cleaning some files this past weekend, and I actually found like when we first started, we were making individual what is now this and very easy for our customers to use. We were packaging kind of the first generation of that in single containers for a batch of cookies, a batch of gummies. It was not scalable, right? You come out of like startups, you come out of the starting gates and with what at the time. So I think that the difficulty was in figuring out how to scale this thing in this weird ecosystem, again, where you can't do things across state lines. So yeah, we hit our head up against a lot of walls. I was in that first kitchen. I was in the kitchen myself. I remember like one midnight Sunday night, I was personally calculating all of our batch specific potency results from the third party lab to put on, the labels, which, was a regulatory quagmire, right? To be compliant with all that stuff. And I was going like, how can this become a business? Like I'm this CEO of this company. We're trying to get launched. And it takes me being in this kitchen at, 10 o'clock midnight on a Sunday night by myself, doing all this math. It was crazy. It was crazy. But, so I think the difficulties have been like taking on this, how do you scale in this industry challenge? That's been the hardest thing. And the other thing that's hard right now is when we describe this whole plant activator and this whole plant process, people often like glaze over, like it's so counter to what we know and what we do, right? It's like it makes people like really scratch their heads and go, I almost don't believe you. Like,
yeah.
easy. So that's a little bit of marketing challenge, you know, and getting a new partner to try it, right? Because once you try it, you're like, wow, that's really interesting. That is really different. So those are, you know, how we all the way back in the past, you know, 2018 seems like a million years ago to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cannabis years, as they say.
It's true. I've heard that. Well, as you wouldn't say it, but as I've heard, you're startup maven. But are the cannabis hooks in? Are you kind of here indefinitely, or is this, you know, once you kind of see Azuca up and off the ground, it's on to the next?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I love plant medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see I would never want to go back to tech. I did tech for almost 30 years. And I learned a lot, but I would say I am, you know, plant medicine, like in very, there are other aspects of that I am interested and curious about, but right now I'm all in on this.
Finally, you had talked about your personal re-education. Ever since you moved to cannabis, who has been the most difficult in your life to re-educate and just kind of help them align with your new way of thinking when it comes to cannabis?
You know, that's an interesting question. You know, the one person that I was close to that has since passed, he was kind of my adopted father. He was the father of one of my best friends. And he would just scratch his head and go like, I can't believe you're doing this. Like, I can't believe you're and so he was very skeptical about the whole cannabis thing. So I'm not sure I ever quite got him over the line. But I'm sure he's on the other side now cheering me on. But, you know, really the other skeptics, you know, like, you know, my mom, you know, thinks it's really interesting. She now uses CBD every day. And it's very helpful to her. She uses some of our CBD products for arthritis pain, and swears by it, absolutely swears by it. So, you know, my husband was a skeptic and he's all in. So, you know, I think people have come along, and I think part of a little bit of that has been, it was such a weird thing for me to do. Like, you know, if I was doing it, there was a little bit of like, Kim must be onto something. Right. Mm-hmm. So, or maybe I'm just very persuasive.
I think a lot of people, I think almost everybody experiences that in the industry at some point, where, you know, you almost wind up kind of defending your actions, just because you're still fighting against that Nancy Reagan mentality that all your contemporaries have, and you're just like, but really, just try it.
You know, I'll tell you, I more have the opposite experience now, where I'll be in Costco, I'll run into, you know, a friend of mine who's, you know, in their 80s, and they're like, will you teach me about cannabis? Because I want to get off of all, you know, these pain meds that the doctor has me on. That is a more common conversation than, you know, Kim, you've lost your mind.
Okay.
Because yeah, and that is not uncommon. And I have, you know, a lot of friends who are in their, you know, 70s and 80s who are very interested, because they also had a lot of the, you know, brainwashing, and they're now wanting options for, you know, for pain and sleep and things that cannabis is lovely for.
Well, Kim, I really do appreciate your time and your insight, particularly into Azuca and, you know, the products that you guys are bringing to market. Before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or Azuca?
You know, our most important core value as a company is helpfulness. So I would like anyone who has any questions about what we're doing, or if they're thinking about launching a MIP line, you know, we'll talk to you at any stage in the process, you know, no obligation. So we just want to be helpful. We want to help people understand. We want to help existing brands if they want to have an enhancement to their line. So I'd like people to know that we really are committed to the value of helpfulness and to reach out.
Did you say a MIP line?
MIP. Yes.
What's MIP?
Manufacture infused products.
Oh, okay. I'm just, I'm swimming in acronyms sometimes.
Yes.
Do you still have the essay?
It's probably somewhere in my garage.
Okay.
I haven't seen it in years.
I'm just curious. I don't know. I found that was a particularly charming part of the conversation. I'm really, really happy that you shared that story with us.
Yes, my daughter was very amused when Mommy joined the cannabis industry, and she was vindicated.
Excellent. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter and make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Kim Rael, co-founder and CEO of Azuca, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.